All right, so I'm going to go ahead and, didn't mean to cover up part of the screen there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Carolyn Burns, and I'm a program manager with the CLEO Institute. So I run our Teachers Network and some of the professional development programs that we do for teachers, such as this one, conferences, educational research, that kind of thing. I am also a practicing educator. I teach at the community college level, my local community college here in Tallahassee. I teach biology and earth science. So I have also taught at the middle and high school level, and I want to say, for coming back on, your first day back, we definitely appreciate it. I really hope that you had a nice, relaxing break. I know that the last couple of years of school have been a roller coaster at best. So thank you again for coming here to meet with us. So a little bit about the organization. The CLEO Institute, it's nonprofit, educational, and nonpartisan. And those principles kind of guide what we do. Our primary education area is climate action, and in particular, climate justice, the intersection of climate issues with the lived experiences of marginalized people and how it impacts different folks. The other thing is that we are very up to date on the science. That is one of our guiding principles, is follow the science. And so every one of our presentations has the most up-to-date data we can get from organizations such as NASA, NOAA, World Health Organization, the UN, all of these organizations listed here. We even have folks on our advisory board from some of these organizations. Let me go make sure that I'm sharing audio. We have a quick video just explaining what we do here.
I want you to ask yourselves those tough questions, the ones we avoid: how we want to live, what do we want for our children, what do we want for our planet.
Our atmosphere is so finely tuned for what we need, and we're treating it like a dumping ground, a sewer. The health impact of climate change is a global problem, and we see the results of that on a local level.
If we fail to act now, then we will leave behind a fundamentally degraded planet for our children and grandchildren, a planet that resembles the futures that have been portrayed in dystopian Hollywood films: unprecedented inundation of our coastlines, droughts, floods, heat waves, superstorms. That's the future that we will see if we fail to act on climate.
The CLEO Institute was founded in 2010 with the drive to educate and empower South Floridians to act on climate. Founded by Caroline Lewis, a science teacher by training, her vocation led her to understand what was causing people's apathy towards the glooming climate crisis: knowledge.
We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction.
Today, the CLEO Institute is the #1 nonprofit organization for climate education, engagement, and advocacy. Through programs like the CLEO Speakers Network, CLEO trains people to become climate speakers by breaking down the science, impacts, and solutions. CLEO's educational efforts are backed by a world-class expert advisory council of scientists, environmentalists, teachers, and government officials. While the world is already feeling the impacts of our changing climate, not everyone is feeling it the same way. CLEO is a leader in the climate justice movement, providing the resources and tools to the most vulnerable communities in South Florida that are on the front lines of the climate crisis.
I wanted to be an outreach for them.
Building communities' resilience through women is the cornerstone of our Empowering Resilient Women program. By teaming up with community members like the YWCA, CLEO is able to empower and educate women on how better to prepare for more extreme weather events like hurricanes while building community. CLEO works to remove barriers and build a wider coalition to fight climate change across faith-based communities, elected officials, and municipalities, schools, and cultural organizations. One of the most important voices that CLEO continues to amplify is that of our youth.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Their Gen CLEO program meets regularly with students across the region, training them to be climate ambassadors in their schools and communities.
Dear elected officials,
this is a crisis. Do your job. We'll be watching.
CLEO recently launched its Climate Resilient Schools initiative to bring their program into the classrooms while building a robust climate curriculum for Miami-Dade public schools. CLEO continues to expand its engagement through multimedia outreach, including television commercials, social media, and billboards. With statewide campaigns like the Florida Climate Pledge,
I care about climate change, and I care about climate change because it affects everybody regardless of race, culture, and ethnicity. Because I'm passionate about the success of my future.
I like the CLEO Institute because it takes the time to educate people about the importance of climate change and the things that we can do to improve our world.
You can have your voice heard too. Fund our climate action work today. The future of Florida is in your hands.
Awesome. So that's a little bit about us, and when it comes to, oh, let me go make sure. There we go. Gen CLEO in particular is really important, and the Climate Resilient Schools program. These workshops are part of Climate Resilient Schools, and so we'll talk about them as we go through this workshop. I've developed Florida State Standard aligned lesson plans for climate, and we have some really great resources that hopefully you can put to use in your classrooms and inspire your students to take action. Right now, I'm going to hand off the microphone to our founder, Caroline Lewis, who, like me, is a science teacher. Caroline, I'm going to go ahead and make you a co-host so that you can start talking about your experiences in education.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's a pleasure to be here. I cannot believe teachers on this first week in January are at the table and ready to open their minds and hearts as to how they can be, even better agents of change in this crazy world we're living in. So in particular, I want to thank Tiffany, Carlotta, Marco, Carol, and you, Phil. Good to see you all. So I am a science teacher and a high school principal by trade. I was born and raised in Port of Spain, Trinidad. I literally lived off the land in Trinidad. I ate mangoes and guavas and papaya and anything I could get my hands on for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When I woke up in the morning, I disappeared. I didn't come home till sunset. And that was my street version of being a most engaged young person in a developing country. And here's what I think the role of teachers is all about. I really and truly had an opportunity to be anything I wanted. I had good grades. I had parents willing to support me, and they really wanted me to be a doctor because I love the sciences. But I really wanted to be a teacher. I fell in love with my high school biology teacher, not in terms of him as a person, but in how he could communicate so much complex material so simply for me. And I was in awe of breaking down science in a meaningful way. So I kept to my original plan to become a teacher and kind of defied my parents in the medical school realm. But my brother's a doctor and I'm a teacher. He's richer, I'm happier. So there you go. So the idea behind being a teacher and being on this call today means you see yourself as part of the change that our country needs, that a society needs. And teachers, whether we want to or not, have a tremendous impact on schools, school cultures, students, student lives, parents, and everybody in between. So it's really important on you understanding your power. And so with that, I want you to embrace the quote that CLEO embraces, that I have embraced since I found the quote, and it defines education thusly. William Butler Yeats said that education is not the filling of a pail, It is the lighting of a fire. So when you think about your role in the classroom, whether you're teaching elementary, middle, or high school, arts, sciences, math, anything in between, you really are truly not just filling pails with information, but inspiring and lighting a fire in the young people who are in your classrooms. And your willingness to learn from them makes them much more willing to learn from you and with you. So I want you to keep that in mind. And I want you to understand that the climate crisis requires all of us who care about it across disciplines to pay attention. And so if you're an art teacher or an English teacher or a foreign language teacher, you've got to see your role in somehow introducing some aspect of the climate crisis in your classrooms, in your activities, in your projects. And that's what today is all about, to infuse in you a desire to cherry pick the opportunities in your school year, in your semesters, in your weeks, in your days, to find those opportunities to connect the dots for people on the climate crisis. You can't do it all, so you got to pick what you want to talk about. For some of you, it could be the incredible heat that we're facing. For others, it could be sea level rise and the coastlines changing. For others of us, it's completely justice. The fact that the people least responsible for this climate crisis are the ones feeling the impacts most severely. So today is about having you think about the range of disruptions that are triggered by the climate crisis, the amplification of these impacts in current time, and the fact that the science is yelling, screaming at us. And if you haven't seen the movie Don't Look Up, it's quite an impressive satire on the world today, where science is making a very strong point, and the powers that be are telling us, no, no, don't look up, don't worry about it, move on with your life. And we as teachers, we can't have that. So I want you to think about two things today. I want you to think about you on a journey to be bringing climate much more to the front in your classrooms and in your schools. So whether you can change your curriculum or add it to your curriculum is really not the biggest challenge you have. It's about getting your school to come up with a poster contest, to get kids to think about some aspect of the climate crisis, to have your school create an assembly that is run by students who are passionate about the climate crisis. It's about you facilitating a more deep science cafe learning after school for kids. Bring in some experts to answer their questions. It's about making your students the experts and putting them on a panel at parent night. So it's all these ways that you can do it. And I always ask for us as individuals to consider this climate crisis and our reaction and our participation in it as a journey. And there are two things you have to do. You have to steep yourself in the information and stay very, very current. And you have to be much more intentional about talking about climate and making the issue of climate change important. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to think about, where are you on the climate literacy scale? 1 means I know very little about the climate science and greenhouse gases and what's happening and why we are trying to move away from fossil fuels. To 10 being I know so much about it, I'm a published climate scientist. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give yourself right now, today, on your climate literacy, your knowledge of the climate crisis? And in the chat, if you don't mind, put in a number from 1 to 10 that sort of indicates where you think you are in being climate literate. Take a second to do that. So I see some 8s, some 6s. Marco, you're a 9, bless you. Yeah, I'm with Ian. I'm about a 6, I think. Carlotta, good. So we have some people who are very informed. And the thing is, the more you know you don't know. So it's really a lesson of seeing it as a journey. So I've been on 6 for a bit. Now I'm at 6.5. I'm heading to 7. But be honest and self-evaluate and always be willing to learn. And the second scale I ask you to rate yourself on is your engagement, your climate conversations, how you are really influencing the people in your lives, your classes, your students, your families, your friends, your colleagues, and what that means that you're engaging them. Are you talking about it? Are you creating opportunities for them to become more engaged in combating the climate crisis? So on a scale of 1 to 10 with your climate engagement thus far, 1 being, I don't talk about it, leave me alone, I'm an island. 10 is, I don't shut up about it, my family can't even bear me anymore, I have nowhere to go for Thanksgiving, and I am just white noise at this stage. So on a scale of 1 to 10 with climate engagement, where are you with respect to your circles of influence? Give yourself a rating now. Yep, Phil, you gotta get you a megaphone. Carol, So people here need to sort of amplify, not you, Marco, you seem to be on a good track. And Carolyn, you work for CLEO, so you have no choice but to be very engaged in this. But those are the 2 really most important things you can do today. See yourself on a journey to become more climate literate about what's happening, why it's happening, and who it's affecting. That's fact, that's information. And then your engagement scale, what more can you do? How can you tease people and provoke them into asking more questions about the climate crisis and becoming more engaged? And as I turn you back over to Carolyn and others, I want you to think about 3 columns on this worksheet that's in the chat or will be in the chat momentarily and in the screen. Think about the climate issue that really resonates with you. Think about where in your school day you might be able to implement a project or a piece of a curriculum or an assembly or an activity for schools. And then think about who in your community can you partner with to make that activity even more resounding. Carolyn and Ian, can you share the worksheet with folks for us so that they can see what we're talking about? If you could put it on the sheet.
Ian just put it in the chat, so everyone should be able to see that and access it.
Right. So if you click on that, and I would invite all of you to do so very quickly, the first column lists a ton of different activities. If you scroll down to page 2, you will see a compilation of things people have told us are the important climate change issues. In the middle column is what teachers in the past 12 years of CLEO's existence have shared with us about what their engagement opportunities look like in their schools. And on the third column is what we have captured thus far from people like you who tell us what resources and partners they work with. So it comes to the point where in some teacher trainings, we actually play like climate bingo. Maybe you want A15. You want to talk about food vulnerability. When do you want to do this? Do you want to do it on a class or a school project about feeding the food insecure? So if you were to select A15, food vulnerability, and want to do a school assembly, so you would be on B4 or B3, a class project, or you might even want to do a fundraiser to help feed people or help grow gardens with them. So there's so much you can think about doing rather than just telling. And then for C, pick the partners you want to work with. Maybe you want to work with C4, the Parent Association in your school, to come up with growing kits to share with the community for them to grow their own tomatoes or their own herbs or whatever we can do. So this, for lack of a better term, let's call it an organizer, graphic organizer, helps you capture what you want to address in the climate world, how you can do it, and who you can do it with. So this is just a tool in your toolkit, a resource for you to dream, to imagine, to create, and to sort of begin your journey as big as you want or as small as you want, but to really take on this important work of making the climate crisis something everybody talks about in a very solution oriented way. So, with that, I thank you again for choosing the teaching profession, for being here, for embracing your role in making the climate crisis accessible to learners, and for taking action in promoting solutions to it. Thank you very much. I hope you have a great day and enjoy it with Carolyn, Ian, and all at CLEO. Happy to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We definitely appreciate you coming out to talk about that. So we actually, for our next bit here, we have something interactive that will hopefully get you thinking about the different ways you can engage your students. So I want you to answer at least one of the following questions. Both is better. What questions are your students asking about climate? And what do you think the most important events, climate-wise, happened in your region over the last year? I'm going to go ahead and share screen. For those of you who might not have used Google Jamboard before, you just click on the link, and this is where it brings you. Jamboards are really cool. They're like an interactive whiteboard that anyone, you don't even need to have any kind of login to contribute to. I have them separated out by elementary, middle, and high school. And so over here, you can click on the sticky note, choose the color, whatever makes you happy, and then just type it in. So I might say, what is global warming? I've gotten that question before, and you click save. There you go. Then cancel gets you out of there, and you can resize it. You can, move it around. Whatever works. And then I like comparing them. What we've noticed when we've done this before with Miami-Dade teachers is there is a marked difference between the kinds of questions that students ask at different levels. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with, differentiation and scaffolding. And so it was very enlightening to see, okay, in order to meet students where they are and to make sure that we're using the most effective strategies and answering the questions in a student-centered way, how can we make sure that we're, talking to the students at their level? So I'll give you a few minutes. I see a couple people popped up on here adding notes already. I can stop sharing for just a moment so you can write in peace without anybody watching. And in a few minutes, we'll go and look at what the sticky notes say, and if you want to elaborate on it. Also, while you're writing, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask any questions or point out something that you've noticed, please do so. All right, I'm going to go back and share what I've seen up there so far. I see the most responses here on high school. And I'll be honest, this is for Leon County up in North Florida, but these are very similar responses to what I saw when we did this with teachers in Miami. So, it's a statewide thing, and it's very much a nationwide thing. Not asking questions so much about what climate change is. I feel like a lot of students actually have good knowledge about the basics of climate change. But the questions they're asking are, what do we do about it? How do we tackle climate change? How can I make my voice heard? And God, this one hurts, and I definitely feel this one. If the grown-ups don't care, why should I? I'll be honest, when I was in high school, I really wish I had had an organization like CLEO to channel, my frustration. Because I was told, your job is to be in school, get good grades, do your National Honor Society stuff, and then once you're out of school, you will be able to do whatever you want. But we know we know now that, first of all, that's not soon enough, that we can't just put it off for 5 or 10 years and let the next generation deal with it. I think Greta Thunberg, if she was a young climate activist from Sweden, she's like, it shouldn't be on us. I should be in school. I shouldn't be at this international meeting begging you to do something. So I totally get their frustration, and it very much echoes how I felt, when I was that age. So I really think that that's something that we're going to cover. That if your students want to get involved, with an organization like CLEO, that can really help. Say, why should I bother if my voice is not heard? The thing is, when you have enough voices speaking together, you cannot help but hear them. Ooh, I love this too, though. Why does global warming lead to cold weather in some areas? I actually am going to address that exact question. That's actually one of the cool things I think about science, is that it's not always intuitive. Sometimes the answer to a question is the opposite of what might make sense. And that's why it's so important that we have that as a process. So I want you to keep these questions in mind, and we're going to play a game called 6 Degrees of Separation. So some of you might be familiar with this game. You can give a little, if you want to give a little thumbs up. Have you heard of it or played this game before? It's often done in terms of like movies and celebrities. I remember when I was in high school, this was something we did using Wikipedia, where you would try to get from one article to another article using the little embedded hyperlinks. So, what connection can you make between the city of Aleppo and grapefruit? And you would try to make 6 different connections to explain how those two concepts were linked. So we're going to do, oh, awesome. So at least some folks are familiar with this. I said I've seen it done a lot with movies, like who was in a movie with who else. We're going to look at the degrees of separation between whatever the subject is that you're teaching or a topic you're really invested in, and climate change with, degrees. 6 degrees of warming, we're definitely going to try to avoid that, but I wanted to do the little play on words. So I want you to stop and think for a moment about a topic that you enjoy teaching, whatever it might be. Or maybe a particular issue that you are passionate about, that you do cover in your classroom in some way. And figure out what connection there might be to climate. So the game is to make that connection. For physical education, how could you relate basketball to the climate crisis? What are the links between, say, students playing outdoors and carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere? That seems very disparate to me at first glance. You're welcome to either put your ideas in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and let me know what you think. Ooh, that's an interesting one. Yeah, plastic pollution from sports equipment. Maybe whatever they're making the basketball court out of.
In the same vein, there's lighting, outdoor courts, but also, for big events, big arenas, there's all the lighting and all the energy that is needed to power these facilities.
Oh yeah, that's a great opportunity to go renewable in, say, a stadium. What about the experience of the people playing? How could climate change affect them? Maybe extreme weather?
Air quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Air quality. We're having more high heat days. If you've heard about the wet bulb temperature and concerns about that, it's the outside temperature at which the human body can no longer cool itself. So we have to worry about heat related illness, which is very common in student athletes.
Also smoke related issues from fires and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There was, and especially, we're going to talk a little bit about disease ecology as well. I know that last summer out west, they were basically concerned, as far as air quality goes. Do we leave our windows open so that we don't transmit COVID, or do we close them so that we don't give our kids asthma attacks from the wildfires? I wouldn't want to have to make that choice, about my students or my children. Acid-based chemistry it's definitely a fun one for me, as a biology and earth science teacher. What link do you think you might be able to make between this and the climate crisis? Or another similar environmental issue that you might be familiar with? What is the carbon dioxide doing to rain and the waterways? Yeah, we have, in places where they burn coal, especially, we worry about acid rain, air pollution mixing with the rainwater. And I'm going to cover this in more detail. Yeah, ocean acidification. The ocean absorbs the extra carbon dioxide. So if you were just doing, your acid-based chemistry, you could incorporate that. There's some also really cool science experiments you can do with seashells to demonstrate the effect of acidity. Maybe you're doing a lesson on photosynthesis. Why is photosynthesis important other than memorizing it in a biology class? How is it important to agriculture, to human civilization, and ecosystems on the whole of the planet? And if we've bred our crops over thousands of years to be highly suited to the specific areas in which they grow. As the climate changes in those areas, rainfall patterns shift. It may get wetter or drier. Or perhaps instead of having steady rain, there will be a period, alternating periods of drought and flood. If it gets too much hotter. All of these can impact the productivity of plants, and so that impacts, everything that goes on up the food chain, including us. I will admit, this book, The Yearling, I read that in middle school, and that is a significant milestone on my decision to move from Massachusetts to Florida. I loved that book. The main character in The Yearling, Jody, lives on a farm. It doesn't even have to be this book. This one is very North Florida. But if you're teaching a book and one of the characters lives on a farm or works in agriculture, how could you use that unit to address the climate crisis? For those of you who teach high school, I mean, the Grapes of Wrath would be a really good one for this too, but depends on the reading level of your students, obviously. You could even link it to perhaps if you saw news stories last summer, there were major protests in India by farmers. We could link it to current events. What are the experiences of farmers in a changing climate? So that'll be a good thing to think about. You're talking about in that last slide what agriculture looks like. So if you want to drop in the chat, what is your favorite topic to cover? And how might you link climate to it? How can you make that connection into, as I said, is unrelated lessons that actually do have a link? I teach bio and earth science, so it's easy for me. But we're here to help you no matter what subject you teach to do that as well. Ooh, outdoor environmental education. Okay, that's an easy one. What maybe something, maybe something hands-on with data collecting could be really cool if you have that opportunity to be outdoors. I know there are lots of opportunities for citizen science. Oh, yeah, natural sciences and human behavior. You could definitely talk about, how human behavior both contributes to these climate issues and how that can be something, when we change our behavior in order to keep ourselves healthy and, change the impact we're having on the environment. Right, so the next thing I'm going to move on to is what we call our Climate 101. It's an introduction to the science, impacts, and solutions of climate change. Before I do, does anyone have any questions, comments, anything you might want to add about 6 degrees? And I will say, for some of those connections, as I go through this presentation, I'm going to answer some of those questions and really help to demonstrate it. But I wanted to get your, brain juices flowing first. So it's the first day back. I know I had a slow start, so.
I just want to mention that in my program, that's almost the core of what we're doing, is trying to connect students' passions to the climate crisis, right? A lot of times it is that kind of, they're separate. Students interested in singing or something like that, how can that be possibly connected to the climate crisis? But that's kind of what we're doing, is we're trying to connect the students' passion to the climate crisis so that they're finding their entry point, and so that they're incorporating something they're already good at or something that they're already doing well at into the climate crisis, and by combining them together they're more engaged. So that is something that we're focused on too.
Absolutely. I love that. Singing, I mean, there's a rich history of, protest songs and art as activism. Especially if you think about like the 60s and 70s, that was such a big part of, the anti-war movement. As someone who has zero musical talent, I always appreciate that. All right. So in order to help those students to make the connection between, between their passion and all these climate issues, we need to have a solid understanding ourselves of the climate issues. I'm constantly learning. I might say, oh, I have a lot of experience in this, but I recently took a class on climate communication and learned a whole bunch of new things. And one of the really cool things about science is that it is an ever-evolving and self-correcting process. Old science is constantly supplanted by newer science. We're correcting our ideas, we're updating and adding new data to it, but that can also make it pretty hard to, keep up with. It's not that what your previous information was wrong, it's just that, it was perhaps incomplete. So we always like to start off with a short intro on what is your climate story. Why are you passionate about climate? Why is it important to you? Why do you want to be a climate speaker or a climate educator? So for me, I was definitely, I grew up in the Northeast, so I didn't exactly get the tropical fruits like Caroline, but I was definitely that kid who had to be dragged in, especially during summer nights. When I would want to just be outside all the time. I was constantly filthy. My mother lamented the fact that I was constantly filthy, always digging in the dirt and turning over rocks and looking at bugs and bringing new pets home. So I've always had that really strong passion for animals and plants and nature. And my background is actually marine biology and ecology, and into oceanography as well. With CLEO, what I've learned is I've always, in addition to science, I've always been very focused on social justice, volunteering, community service. I did a ton of that in undergrad. And what CLEO's helped me to realize is that those two spheres of my life are not in any way separate. That a better understanding of science is needed in order to better serve, people affected by issues like the climate crisis. That when we talk about increased strength of hurricanes, we also need to help people prepare for them. And so, it really sort of brought that together into the realm of what we call climate justice. So I do see, and I teach college, and I still see these kinds of misconceptions in my students. So it's always good to have the tools to address them. The difference between weather and climate, you could talk to somebody behind you in line at the grocery store and have someone, have a similar misconception about this. Weather is what you get on any given day. When you look at the weather radar, when your weather app pops up on your phone, that's going to be the state of the atmosphere, at a specific day and a specific time. Climate is what you would expect. So I expect there to be less rain in January in Florida than there was in June. So I think it's less likely for it to be raining today than it was over the summer. In order to have a true idea of climate, you average the condition of the atmosphere, that weather. We're talking about temperature, precipitation, cloud cover, wind speed, wind direction. You average it over about a decade, and that can give you the climate of an area. You can also think of it as, what clothes you're wearing today versus what kind of clothes you have in your closet. What's the general climate of your area? The climate, however, is changing. It's due to the greenhouse effect. And I want you to just, you can put it in the chat. If you've heard of the greenhouse effect before, did you hear about it as a positive, a negative, or a neutral phenomenon? Is it beneficial? Is it harmful? Or is there a bit of both? A little bit of both? Absolutely. It is really important when it comes to, gardening and actual greenhouses. I will admit that's a lot of the time when I speak to people, I will get a chorus of, negative thoughts about the greenhouse effect because, in the popular media, a lot of people really only hear about it in terms of, it depends on where you stand. A lot of people only hear about it in terms of what we have now, which is the rampant greenhouse effect. So The greenhouse effect is, yeah, natural versus anthropogenic. That's a big difference. If we didn't have the greenhouse effect at all, the Earth would be more like the Moon or Mars, much colder and much drier. The atmosphere is that thin layer of gases surrounding the Earth. It's transparent, so light is able to pass through it. And then a lot of that light gets absorbed by surfaces, and then it gets re-emitted as heat. You can easily test this for yourself. If you go out on a summer day and hold your hand over, flat asphalt, you can feel the heat radiating off it. I don't recommend putting your hand down on it directly, but you can definitely perceive what we call the infrared radiation, which is heat. And what greenhouse gases do is they reflect that heat back toward the Earth. It acts kind of like a blanket. If I have a blanket on my couch and it's just sitting there on my couch, it is not a different temperature from the rest of my house. But my body produces heat. When I wrap that blanket around my body, it reflects my own body's heat back to me, and that's how it keeps me warm. And so that's what the greenhouse gases are doing with regard to the Earth. The Earth is re-emitting some of that absorbed light as heat, and they hold it against the Earth, keep it from going out into space. As I said, we need some of it because it holds in heat and moisture and makes the Earth livable. The problem is that we have too many greenhouse gases. Imagine the blanket getting thicker. You might only need a light sheet in the summer, to trap just enough heat. But if you put on heavier blankets and pile on more blankets, you're going to overheat because too much of the heat your body radiates away is trapped next to you. And that's what's happening on a global scale to our planet. The blanket is too thick and too much heat is trapped. And this raises the global average temperature. Greenhouse gases, the one that you probably hear about most is carbon dioxide, perhaps methane. Water vapor can also act as a greenhouse gas, particularly when it forms into clouds. They can both reflect heat away and trap it. It's really interesting when you get to modeling that. But for the most part, we're worried about carbon dioxide and methane, and the additional carbon-based gases. You'll probably hear a lot of it shortened to carbon, and they're referring to, carbon dioxide in particular and also methane as these carbon-based greenhouse gases. That excess carbon is coming from fossil fuels. We used to have the same 97% of climate scientists agree, but recently there was a new study put out that has revised that figure to 99%. They've done studies. Basically, the more you know about climate, the more likely you are to agree on these three facts. You are more likely to agree with this conclusion as to what the data is showing us. So yes, you might see some studies that show a lower acceptance rate, but it's often not just looking at climate scientists. It's looking at scientists who have different areas of expertise. So these three are fact. Global warming is increasing. The Earth is heating up. It is caused by human activity. There are specific signatures in the atmosphere that can only be attributed to human-caused warming and not to any natural source. And it's happening now. This is not an issue that is far away in place or time. It is affecting each and every one of us each and every day. And we can clearly see, the link with carbon dioxide levels. So you may have heard of, this is the famous hockey stick graph showing what carbon dioxide levels looked like, in the past versus now. And this is the most recent data we have from NASA. So I have also had folks argue with me that, yes, sure, the climate is warming, but it always has. The climate has always changed. It's a natural cycle. This is nothing that humans did or can impact. But when we look at recorded history, we look at the past 800,000 years, we can see that may technically be the truth, but it is not the whole truth. And the omission is significant because it has cycled between about 180 and 300 parts per million. We passed that around 1950, and we're currently at 417 parts per million. That's almost 50% higher than the highest level of pre-industrial times. That is not a natural cycle. And as for the impacts, here in Florida, this is the most vulnerable state to climate impacts in the US. I live in Tallahassee. I was here for Hurricane Michael. So I've experienced this myself. If you have any significant, climate incidents, you can also put that in the chat as well. Just how has it affected your life? So we talk about, extreme heat. I mentioned this earlier with the basketball players. It can cause health impacts. Extreme weather events. We saw that heat dome in, British Columbia in the western US last summer. Food and water insecurity. We see droughts out west. We can't use that water for crops, and heat stress causes lower yields. We see overwhelmed energy grids, rolling brownouts. Talked about our acid-base chemistry, acidifying the oceans. Water absorbs carbon dioxide. The ocean has absorbed most of the additional carbon dioxide we've pumped into the atmosphere. And when carbon dioxide absorbs into water, you can think of it like a soda can. It makes carbonic acid. That's why soda is not so great for your teeth, actually. And so that will damage the corals. The excess heat also damages corals and causes bleaching events. Warmer water holds less oxygen, so we see hypoxic or lack of oxygen events with fish kills here in the Gulf. And of course, that melts the ice and causes increased sea level rise. We see saltwater intrusion into our aquifers. Here in the state of Florida, coral reefs are a huge source of tourism revenue, as well as food for a lot of people around the world. They're, rich fishing grounds, but they're under a lot of danger from this acidification and warming. And, just extreme weather. As far as hurricanes go, we're still working on, they're still gathering data on whether this makes hurricanes more frequent. We are leading in that direction, but we know for sure it makes them more intense. As I said, they undergo processes of rapid intensification. I said, I remember Hurricane Michael. It went from, category 3 to category 5 practically overnight. We didn't think it was going to hit us as hard as it did. And because of the rapid intensification, because it was in such a short period of time, we weren't really able to prepare as much as we might have been. And then, of course, that also leads to flooding. The hurricanes that do hit carry more water and stay in one place for longer. They stall out. And flooding from hurricanes is actually the biggest danger, not the wind speed, but the storm surge and the flooding. And then we see, as wet places get wetter, we see more hurricanes and floods in places like Florida and Bangladesh. Dry places get drier. And, wildfire season out west is extending. The wildfire season is months longer than it used to be. And it's in this self-perpetuating cycle. With this warmer air, more water evaporates. So as it gets hotter, those droughts out west, and we talk about California. I know that this is a Florida-based program, but California is where we get a lot of our fruits and vegetables. They're kind of the produce aisle for the entire country. So that can absolutely contribute to food insecurity, increased food prices. As well as, we just saw the wildfire out in Colorado. So this is also a good opportunity when you're talking about, if you're talking about current events with your students, whether it's part of your curriculum, maybe it's kind of a bell ringer activity, or they just have questions, and you're a person that they trust in order to give them truthful answers about what's going on in their world. You can talk about the fact that when they see these events happening, you can make that connection to climate, even if it's not necessarily part of a formal lesson. And we also see, more precipitation. So we get these things called bomb cyclones, where a whole lot of water gets dumped on an area at once, not in a storm, just part of regular rain, and that leads to flooding as well. One of the questions that was asked by, I think it was in the elementary school Jamboard, was how global warming can cause cold weather. And you're right, it is not intuitive. We say that the Earth is getting warmer, and yet we see these really extremes of temperature. But one of our advisors, a big CLEO supporter, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, she's an excellent climate scientist and has some great resources. She calls it global weirding, because all of this extra energy in the atmosphere, it doesn't just heat the air. It also changes what's going on with wind patterns. Among those wind patterns is the polar vortex, which is a swirling band of high velocity, high altitude wind that basically keeps the cold Arctic air where it belongs. The polar bears can have it. I live in Florida and do not appreciate temperatures below 70 degrees. But when you have additional warming and all that extra energy in the atmosphere, it destabilizes it. So instead of moving around, around the Arctic Circle, it gets wavy. And so you end up with warm air moving further north than is typical, and cold air moving south. So we see here during Winter Storm Uri last year, the one that basically shut down Texas's power grid, this is what the global temperatures looked like. This is, very much not usual for Texas. Oh, thank you. And if anyone's interested, Ian just dropped a link to Catherine Hayhoe's Global Weirding talk. I will say this is probably one of the most familiar impacts of climate change that people have is, yes, the ice melting, the iconic picture of the polar bear, who isn't able to hunt, and poor things. That's actually relating to sea ice, though. And interestingly enough, melting sea ice, while it's not good for Arctic and Antarctic ecosystems, doesn't significantly impact sea level. This is another really easy demonstration to do with your students. Sea ice is kind of like, it floats in the water. So if you take a cup and you fill it up with ice and water and then let the ice melt, will the glass overflow? Will the level of water change drastically? Like I said, you can easily do this. In your own classroom. Versus, what if you maybe laid some toothpicks across the top and put the ice on top and then let it melt into the water? What difference would that make? So it's actually the melting of land ice, the ice sheets and glaciers, that dramatically changes sea level. Because the sea ice melting, the water was already in the oceans and already displaced. Another impact is that as the water warms, it expands. And so the volume of water gets greater, even if we don't necessarily have more water molecules in a given area. So, we look at the Greenland and Antarctica ice sheets. These are the biggest ones. And this is what ice cover has looked like over the past, 15, 20 years. The other thing that's important with regard to ice is that clear ice, or clear/white ice, is very reflective. It has a high albedo. So it reflects heat back out. When the ice melts and you see dark water or, often like a dark rocky surface underneath, that surface absorbs more heat than the ice did. And so that's another impact where it's self-perpetuating. Another big issue we see is with, vector-borne diseases. In Florida, especially here in North Florida, we do still have some freezes over the winters. And so some of the tropical diseases aren't able to survive here. But as winters get warmer, as the tropical climate expands further away from the equator, you're going to see more of these diseases, and the seasons in which they can live are going to be longer. If you have fewer days below freezing, then you have more days in which zoonotic diseases from animals and vector-borne. That means that something carries it, usually an insect. They have longer to live and longer to bite you. So, we're seeing big increases in both tick-borne and mosquito-borne diseases here in Florida. For air quality, hotter temperatures overall reduce air quality. Warmer temperatures, especially in urban areas, trap pollution closer to the ground. So instead of dispersing the pollution further away, it's concentrated. And we talk about solutions, things like, reducing car traffic. We're also going to be reducing the air pollution. And as always, the people who are least responsible for the problem have the greatest impact from that issue. So a lot of children breathe toxic air every day. You could have diesel buses, standing at the bus stop waiting, or just walking next to a road where cars are idling. Leon County has a relatively good grade when it comes to air quality. We don't have as much data for some of the more rural counties surrounding us. But, they're looking at, I'm glad that it's bringing jobs to the area, but they're looking at a new Amazon fulfillment center, and that's going to be a lot more trucks on the road. So we need to ensure that, as we add jobs and develop, that we're not decreasing our air quality. And, especially for high school, I feel like this is a big one. I know it was for me. And I saw some of the questions on the high school Jamboard about, what can I do and why should I care? I know that it keeps me up at night, worrying about, impacts from the climate crisis, how it will affect my future, that of my students and family. We call it, eco-anxiety or climate anxiety. And then, of course, when you have these impacts like heat-related illness and hurricanes, students who are displaced from their home during a hurricane are experiencing a traumatic event. And an increase in global temperature, an increase in hurricanes is going to increase the number of traumatic events. We also see rates of aggression and domestic violence rise as it gets hotter. Utility rates go up, especially here in Florida where we run the air conditioner. People are under more financial stress. It all feeds into, each issue feeds into the others. And it costs so much. It damages our economy in so many ways when we have these crises that are displacing people, that are keeping them from getting to work, that are damaging their homes, that are shutting down cities. You may have heard the phrase, like, there's never enough money to do it right, but there's enough to do it twice. We spend so much money on responding to these issues when we should be putting that money toward, mitigating and preventing it from getting worse. Especially for frontline communities. We see these are the communities that are going to be hit hardest by the climate crisis. Folks living on shorelines or low-lying areas that are highly prone to floods. People living in, wildfire-prone areas. And a lot of those people are already in marginalized groups. They're low income, they're of color, disabled and elderly. We've seen, serious issues with, nursing homes losing electricity and not being able to evacuate their residents. Like women and children, especially households where woman is the head of household, and the LGBTQ community as well, because they often don't have as many resources to respond to these crises. Another big one is outdoor workers. Folks working in waste management, construction, anything, outdoor landscaping, agriculture. A lot of the time, they don't have access to shade, water, or rest, especially agricultural workers. Farm workers are often paid what they call a piece rate. So they're not paid hourly, they're paid on how many bushels they pick. And so that really incentivizes them to, not take breaks, to not stop work, to not put their health first. And so, OSHA doesn't really have much in the way of regulations to protect workers from heat-related illness. I know that I heard that the USPS, the Postal Service trucks, do not have air conditioning, and they're, metal boxes. So I'm just imagining, oh my gosh, especially last summer when we all depended so much, and summer 2020 when we depended so much on the Postal Service getting everything to us, and they were in, unair conditioned box trucks. A great deal of the world's biodiversity is stewarded by indigenous people. So, if they're living so close to the land, they're depending on the land around them, they're really uniquely vulnerable to the consequences of climate change. And, they are among the people least responsible for causing it. So we see, the water protesters trying to keep pipelines out of their community to avoid poisoning their water with leaks. And they also experience environmental racism. Why do you think it was that a polluting pipeline was put through an indigenous community in the first place? But I promise, when I looked at some of those, post-it notes expressing the emotional difficulties, I promised that we would offer solutions, ways to have your voice heard and ways to fix things. And we're going to here. So the most important one is mitigation, reducing the amount of heat-trapping gases that end up in our atmosphere in the first place. So, reducing carbon output, investing in public transit, getting cars off the road, renewable energy, all of those things that keep carbon dioxide in the ground and out of the air. But, the time for complete mitigation is past. Climate change is here, it's happening, and it's affecting us now. So we need to adapt to its effects to ensure that people are able to stay safe and healthy. And so this can include living shorelines, mangroves, seagrass, all the beautiful mudflats in Apalachicola Bay. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm a weirdo, and I love swamps and wetlands of all kinds. The more mud, the better. But they're so much more resilient to hurricanes than building a seawall or building your house right along the shore. You need to leave those natural barriers in place. And green spaces. Here in Tallahassee, increasing the amount of park space available to people. And then, improving the health of ecosystems, because those ecosystems are what protect us. So the Paris Accord was our agreement to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are not on track to make that, unfortunately. We did exit it for a while and then rejoined it last year. And you might have recently seen COP26, the most recent climate conference, talking about what the solutions might be. The fact remains that wealthy nations lead per capita emissions. Yes, en masse, China and India might have a great deal of, greenhouse gas emissions, but per person, we're still leading the pack. So, we need to be taking responsibility ourselves. But I don't mean that on an individual level. It has to be on a national level. It has to be on a global level. We need collective action to move toward things like, carbon-free electricity. The Tallahassee has what we call the Clean Energy Plan. We want to have the city utilities moved over to all renewable by 2035 and have have all of Tallahassee on it by 2050. Of course, those are just deadlines. We're hoping that it's sooner than that. Whatever renewable works best for your area is the one that we're going to work with. So here in Florida, wind power doesn't make quite as much sense for us, but we live in the Sunshine State. So solar power is really important, and we need to make it accessible to everyone. We keep running into this problem where a landlord has very little incentive to reduce the utility bills of their house because, well, they're not the one paying it. And the renter does not have the authority to put solar panels on a house they're renting that they don't own. So we need to take into account issues like that and ensure that people who live in group housing, communal housing, who live in apartments and rented housing, that they have access to this as well. And the fact is that solar employs more people than oil, coal, and gas combined. So I've often seen environmental regulation, it's framed in opposition to development and jobs. And that could not be further from the truth. When it comes to sustainable jobs, when it comes to like trades work, there's so many more opportunities as solar installers. And I say this, I'm very much an academic, and I can talk till I'm blue in the face. I can communicate with everyone. We can get laws passed saying, we have unlimited subsidies for solar. But if nobody is, climbing up on roofs and turning wrenches and installing them, they don't do us a whole lot of good. We absolutely need people to work in these careers. And there's so many opportunities, beyond, environmental scientist or policymaker. I think that's really important to emphasize, especially when we talk to students, because we know that, a four-year college degree is not the only path to, being successful as we help, our high schoolers as they're planning their lives. So again, here in Tallahassee, this is part of our clean energy plan. Working on electrifying the city bus fleet. We always want to try to improve pedestrian infrastructure. There's really no downside to making cities more walkable and bikeable. There are improvements to people's, both physical and mental health when they get more exercise and get outside more often. We know that. And every person on a bike is a car that's not, we see this whole line of cars. Every person on a bike is not emitting carbon. And it makes, just makes the city a better place to live. We need to invest in high-speed rail so that we don't have to drive or take an airplane everywhere we need to go that's long distance. Or, and like retrofitting with planes. And again, these are all different areas where if your students want to explore that, just because they're interested or as a future career, there are so many resources. There's so many resources for them to help them get started. Natural solutions. We want to recreate land sinks and ocean sinks. We want to keep the pollution out of our land and ocean so that they can function with their ecosystem services. We want to have more green space, more trees. If you have an area of asphalt that could be grass, that grass is going to be cooler. It's going to absorb water from any excess rain rather than having it run off and potentially create flooding. It's going to be cooling on the area around it. We have these urban heat islands where highly built infrastructure absorbs more heat, and we can see, 5-10 degrees hotter in the core of a city versus in surrounding natural areas. So, by rethinking how we plan our communities and allowing for more green space, for more natural areas. We can make it better and more livable for people, and also act as, carbon storage. Food waste is huge. Food waste, food as it decomposes, it releases methane. Methane, that CH4, it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but it has 84 times the heat trapping potential of carbon dioxide. If food waste, say food waste to our country, it would be the third biggest polluter in the world. So, by reducing food waste at home and at school, by instituting, school gardens, composting programs, working with local farmers, and then, encouraging kids to maybe bring leftovers from lunch, buy smaller amounts more frequently so that we're not throwing out as much food. You could do a whole unit on this. This could actually be a really great project if perhaps you teach home economics or any kind of, cooking or culinary trades class. Better for your wallet too if you're not constantly throwing out food. So that can lead us into talks about food security. And speaking of food security, it takes a lot more resources to raise livestock than it does to, grow grains or produce. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be vegetarian or vegan. I recognize that, that's culturally insensitive, and it's not possible for everyone for cost reasons, for cultural reasons. But if you can reduce the amount of animal products you eat, maybe do like meatless Mondays, one day a week. Just overall incorporate more plant-based protein into your diet. That can go a long way towards reducing, the carbon footprint of, yourself or your school lunch program. We're always looking to shift from individual to collective action because it's so much more effective. Again, this is something we're working on in Tallahassee. Creating more of a smart city, reducing the urban heat island, creating those green spaces, incorporating a lot of the things I've talked about so far. And smart schools, here's where you guys come in. Environmental clubs. The students in your environmental clubs, you can tell them about CLEO, help them get involved. Starting up school gardens. I know that quite a few schools around here have those, or composting programs. What a lot of the things that Caroline was referring to, announcements and assemblies, including climate literacy in your curriculum. And I will say that if that's something that you want to implement in your school and you need guidance, you need resources, you need someone to come in and talk to your principal, we absolutely are here to help you with that. And I know that, career readiness is big, especially in high schools. Talking about green jobs with your students. And again, a lot of students, when they think about that, are probably going to go to, environmental scientist or policymaker. But there are so many other jobs that can be green jobs. And quite frankly, any job can be a green job if you're doing it sustainably. If you run a home cleaning business and, you're avoiding single-use plastic and using sustainable, earth-friendly cleaning products, that's a green business. And quite frankly, if you advertise that, a lot of people would prefer it. You can have a green business if you're a building manager and you're working on getting your building to be, more energy efficient. All of those jobs can be green jobs, and there are so many opportunities to do things like retrofitting existing infrastructure. Solar installers are huge. Park rangers, educating the public. The thing is, everyone can and should be involved in addressing the climate crisis, because again, there is no downside. It's going to improve their health and improve their future, and we can make that case to them. I like this one, think outside the bin. Recycling programs are nice. I hear about that every time somebody says, oh, I want to do a new program. They're like, we want to do recycling. Unfortunately, most material that gets put into a recycling bin doesn't actually get recycled. A lot of the times it's shipped off to recycling plants in places like Southeast Asia, and it's not of a quality that they can recycle. And now, now other countries are condemning them for the levels of plastic waste in their waterways while we ship our trash to them on barges. So when we think about, say, reduce, reuse, recycle, those are in the correct order. First and foremost should be reduce. Switch over to glass or wood or metal, reusable utensils. If you have the ability to, change anything in your school lunch program to not be using so many single-use plastics, put forth an initiative, write a grant to help make the switch over. You can do that. Then reuse. Take those materials and use them for something else rather than, buying a new plastic bin, using one from food storage. And then with what you can't avoid using, that's what you recycle. But unfortunately, it is not and cannot be your first line of defense against plastic waste. Which, by the way, the other link between plastic waste is plastic comes from petroleum. So the more plastic we use, that also, even if everyone switched to electric cars tomorrow and no one used gasoline anymore, they would still be extracting petroleum to use for plastics unless we can also reduce those. But again, I don't want to put this on you as individuals. That's not fair. 100 companies in the world are responsible for 71% of the greenhouse gases. We need to hold these companies accountable. We need legislation. We need public pressure. Because relying on consumers in a very, very complex landscape of interdependent supply chains, there is no way, really, to live a life that does not do some harm to the environment and doesn't have a carbon footprint, at least not in America. So we need to make these changes at the institutional levels. And so that's how we have our impact. We need to make sure that we have, real true democracy, that people from all walks of life are able to interact directly with their elected officials, so that it's not just those of us who are able to have closed door meetings at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. These frontline communities should have equal access to decision making, not just consulting after the plans have already been made. We need to ensure that there's equity in transportation and health and schooling. People have a hard time caring about, the climate crisis when they're struggling to put food on the table. We need to fulfill the base needs before people are able to put their energy toward making a better world. But, the students have done it. They really are our Gen CLEO students and students all over the country and all over the world, participating in climate strikes, demanding meetings with lawmakers and policymakers and global leaders. We have all different kinds of climate activists who are coming in with different strengths. Maybe they're performers or artists and they're using art as activism. Maybe they're really good at public speaking. Maybe they're a writer. Some of our Gen CLEO students here in Tallahassee have had op-eds published in our local newspaper, in the Tallahassee Democrat, in FAMU's student newspaper. Whatever strengths and abilities they're bringing to the table, they absolutely can and should have a voice. So, how can we start? We want to figure out, our own behavior, how it fits into those different areas, and what we can do to change it. And again, what we want to do is take these ideas and then try to move toward collective action. So if you want to think about your own electricity use, that's amazing. But even more importantly is, pushing towards solar subsidies, talking to your neighbors. We have a partner called Solar United Neighbors that does co-ops. It helps reduce costs for solar. looking at those kind of policies. Transportation, same thing. Going to city, county commission meetings, writing to your legislators, talking about how you want less car-centric transportation in your community. I could go on, but I want to make sure that you all are able to contribute your own ideas as well. So if you signed up before, yesterday evening, I sent this to you already. This is the Climate Action Roadmap, and I can drop a link in the chat as well for you to look at. This is for you. It's asking you, what you can do to change your behaviors and hopefully change those of your community. What is your overall goal and what are the steps you need to get there? So, your goal might be to reduce your meat consumption. Tomorrow, you could look up some new recipes. In 2 weeks, you could change your grocery list. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can drop the link to that worksheet in the chat. And then after that, we have our lunch break. So I'm going to drop that in the chat. If you want, you can turn off your camera for the next half hour. We will start back up again at noon. If you have any questions and you want to put those in the chat or unmute yourself and ask, you can go ahead and ask while we're still here.
Carolyn, I just want to let you know that I have a staff meeting at 12 or at noon, and I'm gonna duck out for about 15-20 minutes just to do my part of the staff meeting. Then I'll be back.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for letting me know. All right, and then for anyone who didn't get it before, there's a link in the chat so you can check out your climate action roadmap. I'm going to go turn my camera off and take a break, but please, as I said, if anything comes up and you wanna put that in the chat, absolutely go ahead and I'll address it when we get back. So we do have a couple great guest speakers lined up. We have here first Brian from the Scientist in Every Florida School program. I'm really excited for this one. They send trained scientists out into classrooms. When we talk about, students seeing, what science careers look like, what scientists do, really getting some great representation of, who these folks are and what the day-to-day life looks like. They have really great resources for that, and I love how they can, either through Zoom or in person, send them out to schools. We have Hannah Heister from FSU. They also have a great in-person program called Science on the Move. And Alize Carrere from National Geographic with her program on adaptations. All right, go ahead, Ryan. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
All right, does everything look good?
Looks great to me.
Excellent. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all so much for taking this opportunity to listen to a little bit about what I do. My name is Brian Abramowitz. I'm a former middle and high school teacher. I taught middle school special education, high school a variety of sciences, as well as being the science department chair in New York City, as well as Dallas, Texas. After teaching, I went on to start working at the University of Florida at a place called the Thompson Earth Systems Institute, which is hosted at the Florida Museum of Natural History, or many people think of it as the Butterfly Museum if you've ever been out there. Earlier conversations have segued into what we do perfectly, really, really well. Because in 2019, the president of the University of Florida basically said, we have these funds to create these innovative projects called moonshot projects, because they were analogous to when President Kennedy said, this is our moonshot. We're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So President Fox, UF president, basically said, we are going to do something that if we are successful with it, it's going to change the face of Florida. So there were about 16 projects that got funded, and fortunately ours was one of them. As you could see, the name is Scientist in Every Florida School, and that's exactly what we plan to do. By the end of the next decade, we plan to connect every Florida public school with a scientist. So what does that look like? Well, it really includes the idea of connecting via virtual platforms, in-person platforms, things like this. So as I said, we are a free program for all Florida K-12 public school teachers. We serve several roles. One of them is by sending scientists to classrooms, either physically or virtually. We hope to inspire our next generation, whether that means they want to become scientists, or we just hope to become a next generation of more scientifically literate students and Floridians. So that's one aspect of it. Similarly, I know from my experience as a teacher, I was asked to teach so much different science content that I found it was really difficult to be an expert on every single one of those things. So as a result, bringing in a scientist to your classroom to model the type of content that you have to teach, a lot of teachers found that extremely helpful as well. But taking a step back, our founders basically realized that there's a lot of really, really incredible research going on throughout the state of Florida. However, there's a huge disconnect between what the public knows and what's happening in academia or in the industry or national organizations. So part of the reason why this Scientist in Every Florida School program was started was to bridge that gap. So we are currently focusing on sharing all the amazing up-to-date information. As you saw on the title slide, it's outpacing any textbook. Most materials online, you're able to have scientists that are currently doing research show up to your classroom, share exactly what that has to do with K-12 learning standards, Sunshine State standards, and why students are thinking about it in a different way than just what the standards say or beyond that textbook. So as you can see, we do it in a few ways. We scientist visits classrooms. We do a lot of live streams that are all standards alive, as well as teacher professional development series. The picture on the right, you'll see we had a botanist work all year with a group of students. And those students came up with hypothesis they wanted a plant. They wanted a test on their plants. So they used these boxes, these plant boxes, and different colored lights to test how plants would grow in different conditions. And we had classrooms doing this all over the state from Pensacola to Miami, and different classrooms were testing different things, and then they were comparing their data across it, testing whether things would change, whether you are in northern or South Florida, different humidity, and a lot of other different factors like that. So I'm going to take a moment and show a quick video. It's about 2 minutes, but I think it does a really great job explaining the program and the value of what we do.
I'm the mother of 3 kids, and I'll tell you, when they're little, when they hear about STEM, they're not always excited about it. And they come from a scientific household.
As a science teacher, I struggle to make science real. When my students think about science, they really think it's a person that's working in a lab coat and somebody that's only working in a lab mixing up chemicals.
It's hard to imagine what a microbiologist does unless you see them in action.
The Scientist in Every Florida School program works to serve all of Florida's K-12 students and serve as an inspiration by providing them with role models of scientists that research air, water, land, and life in Florida's earth systems, as well as being a support system for their teachers.
We saw a need to bring high-level STEM education into classrooms, and we want to do that through scientists and role model visits to different classrooms around the state.
CEFS was actually one of just 8 pilot projects originally funded through a University of Florida Moonshot initiative. This initiative aimed at tackling some of society's most urgent issues.
The program gave us a chance to bring in real scientists into the classroom. I saw how the kids just lit up. They became more interested in science, and they started asking more questions about different scientific processes and how they could possibly be a job for them in the future.
The teachers I've talked to that have had the scientists come to their classroom, they said it's been so easy. They fill out the form, they get in contact, and everything has been pretty seamless.
What programs like SEFS do is show them that these scientific concepts are important things that will touch the everyday person in their everyday life and can have applications that will mesh well with your passions that are important for our society and our culture as a whole.
By me being in an urban school setting and how my kids are able to interact with a scientist was huge, because in the environment where they live in, they have very little interaction with those types of people.
We don't want this to disappear. Our teachers don't want this to disappear. And we know that it's super important for students to engage with scientists and see real world models and understand the importance of STEM. For anyone who has a vested interest in education, a vested interest in the future of our environment in the state of Florida, this program is a stellar way of ensuring that that occurs. And we need people's support. We need people to spread the word and tell others about SEPs, Scientists in Every Florida School.
I'm Bruce McFadden.
So that's really our support video, but the reason I'm sharing with you is because it does a really great job summarizing our video. And in this respect, if it's something that you find of value, the way you can support is simply just by requesting a scientist, and it's absolutely free to do so. So I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation just giving you a quick tour of the website, and then I'm sure there'll be a little bit of time for questions at the end if you have any, or feel free to write them in the chat and I'll see that and answer them in the moment if that's easier for you. So like I said, just giving you a quick tour of the website. The website is here. It's just bit.ly.cef site. Feel free to take a picture of that if you'd like to. Everything's laid out very neatly. It's very easy to find the way to request a scientist if you're very interested in doing so. And one of the things that I really get a kick out of whenever I get these testimonials from teachers, I always follow up and ask about their experience because I always want to constantly grow the program. And one of the things teachers always say, or the kids always say, is, it was amazing to meet a real scientist. And I always think that's sort of interesting because we see these ideas of scientists in TV and movies and forensics on CSI, but a lot of kids don't actually know what scientists do. And I think that's something that they find a really lot of value in trying to understand those types of careers and whether that's something their students may be interested in the future. So if you are interested in requesting a scientist, we have a Google form on our website. It asks a lot of pretty standard information: name, email address, school, county, what is the learning standard or topic you're interested in the scientist covering. And this is really important if you are able to include that information. A lot of our scientists may not have gone to school in Florida. So the idea of including a Florida State Sunshine Standard it will really help them identify, and they have such a wealth of knowledge on these topics. It really helps them pinpoint exactly what you're looking for to make sure your visions are aligned with each other. Also, that being said, since it has been so long since so many of our scientists have gone to school themselves, as coordinators, my colleague and myself will meet with those scientists and tell them, what does this look like in the classroom? How can you take your expertise and make it accessible and approachable to students of the requested grade level? So within that form, you'll tell us all the information that we will be looking for. We ask for at least a 2-week window so we can start to reach out to scientists. If someone's unavailable for any reason, we can reach out to other people. But that gives us enough time to find someone exactly who you are looking for, and again, best matches that request of yours. Once you submit that form, it will come directly to me. I'll reach out to you as a teacher and say, I've received your form. I'm going to start to look to scientists that match your request. Once I find somebody, I'll send an email connecting you as the teacher with the scientist and share all those details, information for your perfect vision for the visit. And then from there, you and the scientist could email back and forth, have that conversation directly between the two of you, and finalize all those details for the visit that will take place. The other thing that we focus on quite a bit is live stream events. We have partners like the Anjari Foundation who specifically focus on marine aspects of it. So we have an ocean expert exchange series with them. We also have a botany series with Mounts Botanical Garden down in Palm Beach County, but these are open to anybody statewide. Typically these last about 30 minutes or so, and during that time frame, scientists will introduce who they are, what they research, really what it has to do with a learning standard, why we should care, why students should care, what we can do about it, and then just wrap up with about a 10-minute Q&A or so. And at the end, all of these are posted to our YouTube channel. So if you feel like a 30 minutes is too long to show your students to do live, you can always just find the best clip that is what you're looking for and show that to your students specifically. And along those same lines, our YouTube channel. We have all of those live stream series. We also do CEF segments upon request. And what these are 5 to 7 minute videos with a teacher requested learning standard. So I'll reach out to a scientist and I'll say, can you just briefly explain who you are, what you do, why it's important, and then can you describe and break down a learning standard? And a lot of teachers will use that as homework. Just watch this video, and then it will sort of like a pre-assignment leading into class where you'll discuss the topic in much more depth. Next up, we have our CEF Spotlight, which is our newsletter that we'll send out to teachers once a month. This will include a lot of really great opportunities, a lot of information about what other teachers are doing in their classrooms, grant and funding opportunities. It includes professional development opportunities that we offer. For example, we have a few coming up right now. One of them is on plant pathology. One of them is going to be on paleontology. The one that is going to start January 29th has about a $1,500 stipend. And we always do about 3 to 4 per year. Our biggest one is 1 week in the first week of July. And during that time, each morning, teachers hear from experts. Each theme of the year is different. First year we had biosphere, next we had hydrosphere, this year is atmosphere. And each morning, teachers will hear from content experts. Each afternoon, teachers will be in a group of about 3 to 4 teachers, be paired with a scientist lab. And the scientist will bring their content expertise, teacher will bring their pedagogy expertise, and together they'll co-develop a lesson that will be taught in the teacher's classroom that year. And our biggest PD, that one usually comes with about a $500 stipend for successful participation. So all those information, you'll be able to be the first one to be notified about that through our CEF Spotlight newsletter. And just to wrap up, again, I really want to say, I want to thank you for your time. I really hope you look into it. Feel free to reach out at any time if you have any questions. Feel free to take a picture of this slide. I'm sure it'll be sent out as well. And my email address is up there. Feel free to follow us on social media too. Another great way to stay up to date with all of our professional development opportunities and other things that are taking place regularly, the best way to stay in the loop. So if any of you do have any questions, feel free to let me know via email. Feel free to write in the chat. I'll stay on the Zoom, I guess another 5 minutes or so, just to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, we'll give a few moments for questions. All right, Hannah, are you ready?
Sure. Just give me a moment to get my screen turned around here.
No problem.
Let me see. Okay. Lecture beginning. Then okay. I have my slides come up successfully.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I think we're afternoon now. Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Heaster. I am from Florida State University, and I wear several hats, like I'm sure many of you do. But today I'm here to talk to you about a K-12 outreach program I run called Science on the Move. And also to kind of put that in the context of climate and how we can think about and relate these things. So just to give you a brief overview, I will give an outline of Science on the Move. I want to think about climate as a framing phenomenon and how I apply that in the program, and really talk about that. I'll just give a couple of examples of some investigations that we run through the program. So Science on the Move is a K-12 STEM outreach program. Prior to the pandemic, we were mostly working in the Big Bend region of Florida, going and doing in-person visits. I came on in August 2020 as the new director. So we made a pivot, and during pandemic times, we've been doing virtual visits with schools and actually able to do that throughout Florida, which has been exciting for me to visit and see different schools within across our state. So the program was born 10 or 20 years ago now, out of a collaboration between the Office of STEM Teaching Activities and Physics at Florida State University. And so the primary focus is on physical science investigations. But for me, having previously been a scientist, working in computer modeling of the oceans, and then also having taught math and physics in high school for a while, physical science is extremely broad and intersects in so many areas, climate and our weather and our global systems being one of those areas. Excuse me. So right now we're hoping to move back to have some in-person and virtual offerings, obviously within the remit of what districts and schools and FSU will allow us to do. So as we're here today thinking about climate, I wanted to think a little bit about some of the investigations I have and talk about climate as a framing phenomenon. I think Brian said when we're in schools and as teachers, there's so much pressure to teach so many different things and so many different standards. And so often though, if you can step back a moment and maybe think about a real world phenomenon that can engage students, and then often real world phenomena are complicated things and they incorporate many, many different concepts. So when I'm thinking about the investigations that I've designed, often I might start about, well, what might be some physical science concepts related to climate? So for example, 4 of the big ones for me are energy, heat transfer, density, and then as a practice, modeling. So one of the big pushes we have in education is to engage our students in scientific practices. And when you're thinking about climate, especially from a physical science perspective, modeling is huge. We have this whole globe, we have a whole ocean, our atmosphere. And so to get students to comprehend that in order to study those things, we actually need to create scientific models is a huge, huge part of using climate as a framing phenomenon. Energy is huge, and both heat and energy transfer within the systems are large. Density often comes up if we think about especially the ocean atmosphere and the motions within it. I also have some pollution related investigations where physical and chemical changes come into it. So climate may be your framing phenomenon, but there's so many physical science concepts that can be brought out through that. And then as I go from here to think about the actual phenomenon, maybe hurricane formation, maybe pollution, weather forecasting, ice melting, climate models, river runoff, global circulation patterns, all of these types of topics involve these physical science concepts to bring them together. So to kind of bring this together, give a little feel for what we do as Science on the Move, I wanted to give you some examples of some investigations that we have available and run. If you're interested to sign up, we'd be happy to come do them at your school, either in person or virtually. So the first investigation I wanted to share as an example is one called Acid Rain. And so the framing of the whole investigation and how we start with students is, what kind of damage might acid rain do? And we go through various processes of making predictions and why they think those things and so on. But ultimately, this is a really simple lab that I've seen done, like advertised on the internet, mix some baking soda and vinegar. Like lots of people do that. Okay, great. But now if we step back and take the framing, we now have a real world context. If we compare it to flour, we have a physical change and a chemical change that we can incorporate. And then as we come back out at the end, we can discuss, well, how is this model good or bad? What do we represent? What do we not represent? And so it takes something that's very simple and sometimes used as whiz bang pop but steps it back and relates it to our world and relates it to the bigger climate phenomenon. So the framing, what kind of damage might acid rain do, but then really going through the investigation, you get into physical and chemical changes in pollution in terms of content, in terms of scientific practices, you get into modeling, predictions, observations, asking students to back up with evidence. So again, kind of rounding that out. Typically for me, I have done this investigation with students in grades 4 through 8, honestly, primarily because that's where physical and chemical changes are big when they're being taught in the standards. I have done this investigation with slightly younger students where we have to leave out the idea of physical and chemical changes, but they do get the idea of properties changing. We've done something to that baking soda. It's not the same as it was. Can you tell me, has the texture changed? Has the state changed? Things like that. So there is a little wiggle room, but typically 4 to 8, depending on the standards. Just as another brief example of one that I've looked at in terms of pollution and related to our climate, is I have an oil spill investigation, and lots of the oil spill investigations I've seen are focused on cleanup. But this one actually looks a little more at the spill itself. And you can set up a real, again, like a really simple model with some oil in a little cup and some water, and then you take the cup out and the oil will rise to the top. But again, having the framing of an oil spill helps engage those students and gets their brain thinking. There's the physical science concepts of density and immiscibility, because those fluids won't mix no matter how hard I try, how many spoons I give them to whisk it up, it won't happen. And then we come back out into conversations about, well, why is this a good model? Why is this a bad model? Why do we need a model? We can't go make an oil spill in the middle of the ocean. Like, this is not a good idea. And so again, using, this one's a little more about pollution and to really relate to climate. It's like, well, why do we need oil? How is this impacting our climate? And so on and so forth. There's those ideas. So another set of investigations that I tend to look at, or kind of class, is the investigation I have called Stormy Weather kind of encapsulates it nicely. So there's some big framing questions. Ultimately, how might climate change impact hurricanes? But then you kind of condense down. So what drives a hurricane? What does the inside of a hurricane look like? And you can kind of come in and condense, and then as you finish the investigation, come back out again. And so here we have tons of physical science content put up in here. Density, energy, heat, convection. Ultimately, as our climate is changing, our energy is changing, it's going to drive these stronger hurricanes. And again, the practices, modeling, predictions, observations, and explanations. And so again, it's that our climate phenomenon and that big picture thing is so important and what we want to convey to our students, but we also can bring in this extra thinking and picking apart and get them to really understand what's going on, not just regurgitate, oh, I heard this fact, I heard this thing. Again, I'm showing all my kind of upper elementary, middle school investigations with you today. I think this is because a lot of where the climate standards lie are at those ages. There's definitely ways to push it up higher into high school. We have a more in-depth discussion of modeling. You can get them to do different things with the model. And similarly, these concepts, density, energy, heat, and convection, very easily spread out into global ocean circulation patterns again. And a similar ideas of, well, what happens if we change the heat sources, either at the poles or at the equator? Why is this important? Is energy being transferred in our system? Why does that matter? And so on and so forth. So as a final example I would like to share, and it is very appropriate that Brian spoke just before me, is something that I've been working on with Dr. Ali Wing through Scientists in Every Florida Schools about barrier clinic instability. So Ali is a phenomenal climate and atmospheric scientist here at Florida State University. And at the top there, you can see some pictures. The one on the left or right hand side is of a tank she's got, and she has these wonderful videos of the tank. And really the overarching question that these tanks help us look at is, how might climate change impact the weather? Why does weather change from day to day? And these are wonderful because they're videos Ali has available, so they can be played in the classroom, and Ali could come and demonstrate the lesson. A teacher could do it in future years themselves. And again, This incorporates all sorts of content from weather, heat transfer, and forces, and again, modeling predictions, observations, and explanations. So much, again, coming from these real world climate-driven phenomenon. We actually tested this out we've done grades 4 through 10 have worked with this, and it's really, I mean, Ali especially does an exceptionally good job of helping pitch the explanation as appropriate for the grade level that they're at. But this is a very involved system, and so you can back it out if you're dealing with younger grades who are starting with these concepts. You can push up the level of detail with the content and the practices, again, if you're dealing with older students. So I was going to finish up that if you're interested in these visits, we have the Science on the Move website, and also the Scientists in Everly Florida School website, which Brian just shared with you there. So you have the that one in the chat, and I can go ahead and put the Science in the Move one in there as well.
The links will also be in the follow-up newsletter that we'll be sending out to everyone who registered today.
Yeah, great. So yeah, that was just to share a little bit about what we do and where the thinking is coming from. And really, we want to be here, and we want to share with teachers. Our program runs that we can come into schools and do it, but we also have an equipment loan program, so we could come into schools one semester, do the visit with you, and then if a teacher's confident to go on and do that themselves, they could borrow the equipment from us and do it later in future visits with themselves. Thank you. Carolyn, I think you're muted.
Thank you so much for coming out. I'll give a few moments. If anyone has questions about this, about the program, about the website, where they might be able to, access materials, go ahead. You can either unmute yourself or you can put a question in the chat. All right. Well, if we're all set, as I said, the contact information and websites and the materials shared by these first two guest speakers, I will make sure to include that in the follow-up newsletter that I send out for everyone. And you can, of course, share that with anyone else at your institution that you think might be able to use those resources. So I want to say thank you again for coming out. I've seen this presentation firsthand, and I thought it was fantastic. So yeah, see you around.
Thank you, Carolyn.
All right, so unfortunately, our last speaker wasn't able to make it live. However, I am going to share her materials with you. So we've partnered with Alize Carrere. She is a National Geographic explorer and also a student at the University of Miami. And she spent the last few years developing a short documentary series called Adaptation that was played on PBS. And you might also be aware of, and I hope you are, PBS Learning Media. So as a Florida teacher, you basically have you can make a free account with PBS Learning Media, and they will give you access to videos, simulations, lesson plans. For those of you who use Google Classroom, you can integrate everything quite easily with Google Classroom, so I've definitely appreciated that feature, though I don't currently use that software. And so she's got this place-based learning, where she's looking at these different areas of the world, what the impacts of climate and environmental degradation are having on those communities, and then most importantly, perhaps, how they are adapting to it. So first things first, I'm going to show you the preview video. I should have the audio sharing.
Right now, our environment is facing rapid and dramatic change. From global warming to rising sea levels to new invasive species. As a global community, we know what we need to do to address these problems at their source. But we will also have to adapt. In fact, for millions of people around the world, adaptation is already a part of everyday life. My name is Alize Carrere. I'm a scientist and National Geographic explorer living in Miami, Florida, a city where adaptation to climate change is right at our doorstep. I study how human lives are impacted by environmental change. And in my work, I envision the kind of futures we want to live in. My research has taken me around the world, where I've learned from communities who have had to experiment with new ways to survive. From the reefs of the South Pacific to the rivers of the American Midwest, in this series, we'll discover some of the innovative and surprising ways people are learning to adapt. These are their stories.
So I'll just drop the links here. This is for the general PBS video page. But here is where I think it'll be really great for you guys, on PBS Learning Media. So as she said, she went all around the world, and there are four different lessons. You can click on the videos directly. The floating gardens in Bangladesh, we talked a bit about, flooding. Bangladesh, like Florida, is very low-lying, and the country is made up almost entirely of wetlands. So they're dealing with a lot of sea level rise. If you look at, and I'll show you what the lessons look like, they ask you to make comparisons to where you're living. So that could be a really good one, talking about sea level rise in Florida and how we adapt to agriculture. Invasive species, this one isn't directly climate related, although of course you can certainly make that link, because the changing climate does allow species to expand beyond their historic range. For example, the invasive lionfish in the Gulf of Mexico that are native to the Indo-Pacific. They're a huge problem in South Florida and the Gulf fisheries, but they're expanding further northward because of warming seas and alterations to the Gulf Stream. So you can absolutely make those connections as well, as Dr. Heister was saying, using climate as that framing phenomenon. We've already touched on coral reefs a bit. We have those here in Florida, and of course those South Pacific, coral atoll islands. It's very much a part of their environment and their culture. Okay, this one is really cool. Ladakh is, it's an area in the Himalayas, up in the northernmost part of India, and they don't really get much rainfall. They receive most of their moisture from melting glaciers. But of course, as the glaciers are receding, they're having some issues with snowpack not providing enough, enough water in the rivers. Similar to what's happening, in the American West. California does not get a great deal of rain throughout the summer growing season. They rely on irrigation that comes down from the mountains. So again, we can make those connections to, examples of the students' communities or communities that they're familiar with, and talk about how people in different areas of the world are dealing with similar phenomena. Again, what I really like about this is that it is so solutions focused. We talked about mitigation and adaptation. And with adaptation, we acknowledge that there are current effects of climate change that we cannot avoid, and we need to ensure that vulnerable people are not going to be disproportionately impacted by it. So I'm going to show you what the lesson plan looks like. So for each one, after they watch the video, they're looking at, their local community and climate. And as I said, you can make some of those connections. And that, this could potentially be something where you could do a science and social studies collaboration, talking about what solutions in other cultures look like, what other people are doing, you know, respecting these different ways of living and different ways of learning about the world. So lots of opportunities for social studies and potentially for writing. And then for each of these lessons, they have preparation for the teachers. Yep, there you go. You can share it directly in Google Classroom. If you're still doing any kind of virtual learning, that is a great thing about this, is that it's very conducive to virtual learning. It shows you what standards are being covered. This is a national one, but if you sign in as a Florida teacher, it will also show you the Florida standards. And then if you look at support materials, so you can easily, you can print this, you can put it into a Google Doc or, a Word document, print that out, whatever makes most sense for your students. They include world map handouts, characteristics of people. There's some great interdisciplinary ideas here, where we're talking about these people's, culture and language and agricultural systems. And you can go back and do this for each of the 4 different videos. And then for your concluding activity, the students are going to take this and think about themselves and their community. You can include the engineering design process. If your school has a STEM center, you can work with them. Talking about what their climate story would be, similar to what I shared at the beginning of this workshop. And really give them that, really include that. How are you relating it to your community, to what you can do? Because of course it's going to be different depending on where you live and what your landscape looks like and what your resources are. So again, I highly recommend this. I dropped the links in the chat, but I will also put the links to these materials in the follow-up newsletter I'll be sending to everyone who registered. Are there any questions about that? All right. If you'd like, I'm going to offer a 5-minute break. When we come back, we have a breakout room activity where we're going to take the worksheet that I sent out to everyone before this workshop and go over it. So if you need to go, download it, print it out, take the next 5 or so minutes to do that. If you can pull it up and write on it directly, that's fine. I won't be collecting it. It's very much just for you, but I will post a link to it. We're going to be going a bit further on 6 degrees of separation and really trying to work that into our classes. So there's your link. That'll give you a few minutes, and then I will go over it. I'll go ahead and share screen so you can see exactly what I'm referring to. So this relates back to the presentation and activity from earlier today when we were looking at the 6 degrees of separation. How we can take these, quote unquote, unrelated lessons and make the connection to the climate crisis. I've done this with teachers. I've also done this with program managers for various community programs. As I was saying, there is a connection because the climate crisis affects every part of our lives. There is a connection that no matter what you're teaching or who your students are, there is going to be something that they care about, that they're passionate about, or you can relate that back and incorporate civic engagement, incorporate STEM, incorporate this, community level action into your classroom and, into your students' lives. So normally I would do this in breakout rooms, but I think we're okay to just stay in the main room for now to work on this. And you can even just answer the questions on a separate sheet of paper if you're so inclined. I want you to think about what lesson or topic is your favorite to teach. I know that for me personally, I'm really passionate about source evaluation and media literacy. That's something that's really important to me and to my students, or I feel like it becomes more important after the lesson. I require that they analyze news stories, that they look for, who is the author, what are their credentials, what might be their funding source. If it's a scientific article, what kind of area of study does that person have? If they're quoting people, then who are they quoting and why? And then they need to be able to create their own argument. For me, it's a scientific argument, but you could certainly use this in other classes, in which they take these sources that they've thoroughly vetted and use them to support their argument. And I do it as claims, evidence, reasoning, and they're allowed to choose the topic, but the important thing is that they're learning about scientific literacy, media literacy, and how to just, watch the news as part of their everyday lives in such a way that, they're not going to be misled. So that is really one of my favorite things to teach, and I honestly think it's incredibly important in today's, media and information environment to not only have good information, but considering that science continuously changes and updates, to know how to find what information, what new information is and is not valid and reliable. So I use that and focus it around, I can use that and focus it around climate information. What article about, weather and climate and climate change can you find that either does or does not present it in this way? So if anyone would like to unmute themselves and let me know what their favorite topic is, or you can go ahead and drop it in the chat if you'd prefer to do that. I'd love to hear about what your ideas are. And then we're going to take it from there, what your lesson or topic is. Look at the activities. As I said, for mine, they're required to do that breakdown on credentials. Underlying issues for me are, science and media literacy and misinformation. And I think it's pretty obvious what the links are, between that and climate. Because a great deal of our reluctance to take action on climate change is due to this kind of misinformation. So please go ahead and share. Either unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I'd love to hear what your favorite lessons are.
Well, I can go ahead. I'm not a classroom teacher. I run an education program. So I do teach in the classroom, but not in a traditional sense. But my background is as an outdoor educator, and specifically in regard to bike packing or cycling. I've done that for years. And it's my favorite thing to teach is cycling and, camping and cycling and that kind of thing. And oftentimes, like the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I mean, cycling is just this metaphor for everything else going on in your life. So, and so what it really boils down to is personal resiliency, and how are we able to kind of, get through life on our own accord, using our own talents, using our own skill sets, and acknowledging that, I have what it takes to get something done or get from point A to point B. I used to lead bike packing trips in Argentina with students who've never even ridden a bike before. We had to teach them how to ride a bike before they even did it. And so that kind of point A to point B, that process and the development and the encouragement and all that stuff that's needed to get from point A to point B was a beautiful thing. And so cycling and knowledge of cycling and knowledge of camping, those were the tools that we taught. And obviously students, receive those tools, but in receiving those tools and receiving that education, they built up their own personal resiliency and their ability to kind of think on their toes and their ability to, problem solve in an unfamiliar space. And those lessons and that ability to kind of acknowledge that I have the strength to accomplish something like this is invaluable going forward. And so a lot of our processing was on how are you going to take this newfound knowledge of yourself and this power that you have, how are you going to take that and use it for good in your community? So, we wouldn't necessarily attach it to climate change, in the past, in past trips that I've done, but it certainly can be channeled and it can be put toward those issues, especially with a topic like cycling, which in it of itself, it's a mitigation strategy in it of itself. So there's certainly a lot of parallels there. But yeah, that's my lifelong passion is cycling, and teaching cycling, getting kids out on bikes is what I love to do. So
honestly, I love that. I managed to get through college and most of grad school primarily as a cyclist. I didn't have a car till I was 26, and I can definitely tell you what areas are more or less bikeable. And you're saying it's absolutely it is itself a mitigation strategy. And those like the physical and mental health impacts. There's no downside to more bike accessible areas, and absolutely when it comes to greens, planning for green cities. So what do you think you could do maybe on a collective community level with cycling? Have you ever tried like looking for like policies when it comes to city planning and making more areas bike friendly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee with the city, with a city council member. And that's just one avenue where I'm trying to, channel some of this knowledge and background that I have. I'm trying to channel it into, building more, bike friendly or pedestrian friendly infrastructure here in Santa Fe. So that is my big thing. That's my personal project, outside of work where, I do all these other things. That's my personal project and my personal, entry point on how I can contribute in a positive way. So it's green infrastructure, bike infrastructure in and around my city, because I use it all the time. I commute to work every day. So it's something that will benefit me, but it also benefits the entire community in a number of ways.
That's awesome. That is kind of one of the things that we emphasize, is individuals taking action is great, but collective action is better. Making these green sustainable choices easier for people so that we're not putting the onus on individual citizens of fixing this colossal problem. So that really does touch on these links. We've got our physical education, we've got STEM education, you've got civic engagement. I'm sure you have debating and speaking skills, and that is really interdisciplinary. And so, getting students involved in that kind of thing. Does anyone else want to share what their particular project might be? Or it in no way has to be as, that fleshed out yet. If it's just a spark of an idea, if we just have that first box filled in so far, what your lesson or topic is, we can definitely start there. That's what we're here to help you with. what was your favorite lesson that you taught last year? Maybe you had to change something to be, more virtual friendly, and we can think of, a climate lesson that might be virtual friendly. I know that some districts are, going back to at least the first couple weeks of online classes. So, fair warning, we will be asking for a reflection and for a lesson plan at the end of this workshop. So this, between this and the planning workshop that Caroline made earlier, these can be really good ways to get started with that. But if perhaps you need a little bit more, help to get started, I also want to show you the lesson plans that I've developed. And I'll show you where you can find those. So here is our CLEO Institute website. If you go up to Get Involved, Youth Programs, you have Climate Resilient Schools. And this talks about all the different programs we have, climate presentations that we offer for classrooms, which, by the way, you can absolutely reach out and we will do that for you. So here you can request that climate presentation. This is where we're at now, the Teachers Network. We will be putting your information in, so you'll be receiving some communications with us after this, since you signed up with us on Zoom. But if you want more, you can always come here, and then here are the lesson plans. So I developed them for all the different grade levels. They often have a PowerPoint presentation, in addition to a student handout and a teacher handout. And if you just click on it, you can download those links. I think the teacher handout might be among the most helpful, because this one gives you everything you need to know how to do it, and it also tells you which of the standards for each grade is addressed. Every one of these lesson plans is interdisciplinary. So yes, they have science standards because we're always talking about climate science, but they have at least 2 more. If I could get all 4 major subjects involved, I absolutely did. For most of them, we'll have language arts, some will have social studies, usually math, some kind of writing. And so they're all listed and they're all hyperlinked, so you can click on it. I'm very familiar with CPALMs. I know what these are just looking at them, because I've had to stare at them for so much, but you can do that. So if you're preparing lessons, I know that when I was teaching at the middle school level, I had to submit my lesson plans a week ahead of time to the vice principal and get those approved before I could go teach them. So if you have a system where you need to let your administrators know what you're teaching and how your lesson will address the required standards, that should absolutely be helpful for you with that. Then your materials and procedures and vocabulary. For most of them, they do also come with PowerPoint presentations. I'll just show you this one. So this breaks it down on a very basic level on what is the greenhouse effect. And so we have, lots of pictures. This is for lower elementary. This video actually is from Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. You can use that. Highly visual, lots of video. We have our vocabulary words separate. I also have definitions for them in the teacher's guide, so that might make it easier for teachers who are perhaps not science specialists. And it's just, very interactive in terms of the presentation, as well as having all of those, support materials available. And, if you wanted to, discuss with me, reach out and say like, hey, I'm really interested in using this lesson plan. Could I have any guidance? I'm 100% open to that. And then they also include, a student, each of them will also include a student handout. That are, age appropriate for each of the grades. I will admit, as a former middle school science teacher, the middle school one is my favorite. Have the presentation. It's based on real data from NOAA, looking at the frequency and incidence of hurricanes. And once again, we have all the information you need as a teacher, all of the standards we might be addressing, separate links to the video. And the student handout also includes, a reading comprehension piece.
This part here is for middle school, you're saying?
Mm-hmm. And it's based on claims evidence reasoning. So you can incorporate that. You can incorporate that as, science writing standards. Creating evidence. But there's also, I can download the presentation and show you, but there is also, quantitative reasoning involved. If you look at the presentation, it's giving you maps and numbers and asking you, how many are happening during each month. So I think that's something that I think that's something we don't get enough of, honestly. I see it because I see it in my college level students, that their quantitative reasoning skills, I'm giving them high school level assignments and sometimes seeing them struggle. So I think having more of that, where they're not doing, math problems in isolation, but they're really looking at data and thinking about what it means for them in their world in a more authentic context. I think that's really important. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but using climate as a relevant framework of something that they hear about, they care about, they're curious about, and then using that as a way to get them to look at evidence, look at numbers, write about it, write about their feelings, take civic action. There are just so many different ways that you can incorporate this into. That's why we call this climate across the curriculum, because whether you're an elementary teacher who's covering multiple subjects, you could use this project for multiple different subject grades. Or if you're in, pardon me, I'm a bit sniffly. Or if you're teaching in the upper levels and you could coordinate, if you teach, you teach science and someone else teaches social studies, and you could do a joint interdisciplinary project. There are lots of different ways to do that. And, our lives are interdisciplinary. I do a lot of reading and writing, but that reading and writing centers a lot on science, and I need to analyze numbers. And the work that I do, the work that we all do, teachers are always analyzing, data from ed tech. We're not doing it in isolation. We don't have, okay, I'm doing math now, and then I'm going to go write about something unrelated. So I think pulling them together and making it interdisciplinary is a really great way to get kids engaged and, make it a more authentic experience for them in, science and academia. So I did lower elementary and middle school. Would anyone like to see one of the other? I can definitely just give you the link here, and it will be in that follow-up email. But would you like me to go over any other one in particular, while I'm here on the website?
I don't necessarily need that, but just to be clear, this stuff will be sent to us via email after the.
Well, I won't be necessarily sending all the PDFs, but the link that I put here, if you scroll down, you can find all of them to download.
Okay.
So if you just go, if you just go to Teachers Network and scroll down, here's everything you need. And you can just choose your grade level and click on it, and it will, bring you to where you can download all of the materials. Like I said,
Great.
don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, that's basically what I had for today. I can go ahead and share what our next steps are going to be. And I can definitely stay on and available for the full amount of time for any questions. All right, so what now? We've gone over our Climate 101. So we have a good solid background on the science impact solutions and why this is so important to yourself and to your students. We did our 6 degrees of separation. So we know that no matter what subject we teach, whether it's outdoor education or language arts or math or civics and government, that there are absolutely links you can make to the climate. And because it is something that is important to your students and is affecting them, they want to learn about it. So I find this really helpful. I would like a reflection on what was covered today and what new tools and strategies you might have come away with. I do these workshops, basically as often as I can, as often as the districts will have me. And I always try to bring new tools, new strategies, especially new resources, with our lightning speakers. So what did you learn from this workshop? What was, one of the issues discussed that you think it was especially important? Maybe it really stood out to you. Maybe it impacts your students or yourself, or it's something you're particularly interested in. What one of those strategies were, presented by either myself or by one of our speakers. And what else do you plan to use? And, this isn't just talking about pedagogy, but also, climate action. How can you take climate action with your students? And then producing a climate lesson plan. You are welcome to use the lesson plan from Adaptations or any of the CLEO lesson plans that I developed as your starting point. If you want to sort of adapt those and make them into something that you need that will work best for your classroom, absolutely go ahead. Or if you want to take something that you're already doing and sort of add a climate lens, like Dr. Heister was saying, she does, she was looking at oil and water and how, you do layers with density, and she added a climate focus. So you can absolutely do something like that where you take an existing lesson and you find that climate angle. Again, if you have any questions, there's my email. And you already did, if you registered, you did already receive an email from me, so you'll have it. You can reach out to me with questions at any time, and I'm more than happy to, work with you and talk you through it. So that's what we're here for. We're here to support teachers. Trust me, after the last 2 years, we want to offer any help. As I'm sure you can take whatever you can get. So send those to me. These instructions will also be in the follow-up email. So if you're not writing them down or taking a screenshot or what have you, you can absolutely get access to those. As soon as the Zoom recording is available, I will put that into the newsletter and send it out. So probably tomorrow. And get that to me, please, by January 18th.
Yearling, quick question.
Yes.
This, will there be a recording of this available? I mean, I missed part of it, so.
Absolutely. So we have this whole thing recorded. It's going to take a couple hours for Zoom to sort of process it. And as soon as it does, I'm going to include that in that follow-up email that's coming from, it's going to come out looking kind of like our newsletter, and you can watch it there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so just give it a couple hours. I'm not entirely sure what Zoom is doing, but it just doesn't make it available until 4 to 6 hours later.
Right. Cool. Great.
Ian is going to drop a survey in the chat. I would very much appreciate if you would fill that out. The survey will also be in the follow-up email, but we're always trying to, we're always trying to improve these. We're always trying to make them better. However we reached you, let us know, how did you hear about this? Would you recommend it to other folks? Was there something you felt was, missing? We're educators. We're in a continual process of improvement. So please help me out with that. And once I get that information, you'll get a certificate of completion in your email. So you can submit that to the district, and for everyone involved who came here from Leon County, then I will go and do that directly because we did partner up with them. You will also get a link to the WhatsApp group chat for the CLEO Teachers Network. We share lots of links and events and stories, like news stories that might be helpful in classrooms. If you ever want to sort of just talk shop with other teachers about what's available, we're there. So that about wraps up my portion. As I said, we can stay on. We can stay on longer if you have any questions, if you want to discuss anything, hear more about, the presentation. Oh, and everyone who came is going to be getting a, $50 gift card. All the teachers get one for Target. You can, if you want to use it for school supplies, that's great. If you want to use it for enough coffee and chocolate to get you to spring break, I 100% understand and endorse that usage.
Caroline, I want to thank you for this presentation. I found it to be very informative, and I'd like to stay on just for a bit. I do have a few questions.
Absolutely. So whenever you're done with the survey, if you don't have any questions, you are free to log off and enjoy the rest of your day. As I said, I will send out the follow-up with the recording and all of this information to everyone who registered. So you'll get that by tomorrow morning. And if you do have questions, you can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask, and I will be happy to go over whatever it is, even if it's not directly CLEO related. If you have other questions about climate or education, I'm happy to chat.
And the name of this event was Climate Across the Curriculum, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, like I said, I have a couple questions. Is now a good time, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Marco and Carlota, I think Marco said he needed to log off. As I said, you're welcome to stay on as long as you like, but whenever you're ready, you can go and get ready for what I'm sure is going to be a doozy of a semester. That's literally what I'll be doing tonight. So, all right, have a great rest of your day, and Happy New Year.
All right, yeah, Happy New Year. Bye, y'all.